The Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, will deliver the country's national budget on Wednesday. It comes at a time when more people than ever before are unemployed in this country. eNCA's Devin Murugan joins me now for this discussion. And Devin, this is an important budget that must address some of the state of the nation commitments from the president, as well as, the objective realities that the country faces.
And it happens every year that way. You have the state of the nation, you get a clear picture or understanding of what needs to happen, and then it's followed by the budget. But getting back to what you first said to us, 12 million South Africans are out of work in this country. Much of that is made up of young people, and on Wednesday, we'll get an answer as to whether or not we could find a remedy inside the budget. Now, there's a lot of things that the budget can do to try and answer the question of how we put young people into jobs. Now, with us this morning, Dimpho Lekgeu is a community manager at Youth Lab. And then we also have Bonginkosi Mchunu, a campaigner at Youth Capital. Let's try and find out. I think we often sit down with extremely well-tuned economists on the show. They've been around forever, but we really need to get that youth injection into this to find out what can feature in the budget, if anything, to remedy the situation. So maybe I should just throw the first one to Dimpho. Dimpho, thanks indeed for talking to us. I mean, does a national budget offer an opportunity? Because policy is done before the budget, isn't it? But does a national budget offer an opportunity to lay the groundwork for young people in this country to be employed? How can it do so?
Sure. Good morning, Devin and Tulas, and thank you so much for having us. Absolutely. I think that what the budget does is kind of give us an idea of what the priorities of the government are. And what it does is it also gives us a commitment, not just from the presidency, to say that this is the vision that we have to pull young people out of the current socio and economic situation that they find themselves in. But these are the actual funds that we're going to allocate into the various departments that play a role in developing the lives of young people in this country. So it's their commitment and their financial backing to following up on the various policies that then lead to various initiatives and programs. I will also just add that Youth Lab and Youth Capital have created various digital platforms that allow young people to give their insight, their perspective, and kind of just, their inputs on some very important conversations. And what we've been doing over the past couple of weeks is looking at SONA and now obviously the budget speech through a dialogue series that we created on Twitter that's called So What? And one of the main things that comes up each time is obviously this issue of employment rights. Young people are saying, we can see that the presidency is creating these kind of micro-employment opportunities for young people, right? We saw last year we had the Teachers Assistance Initiative, and now we heard during SONA last week that 10,000 young people are going to be given a chance to be absorbed into Home Affairs in order to digitize systems there. So what we then want to hear is, now that you've spoken about the plans and the initiatives and the programs that can temporarily alleviate the employment problem for young people, how much money are you actually going to back behind those programs? Because we're not just satisfied with seeing young people in jobs, we also need to make sure that they are taking home a livable wage.
Bonginkosi, let me bring you into this conversation. How critical a moment is Budget 2022, given the emergency that we face in as far as jobs are concerned? And I think, using the word emergency, even that feels at times like it's insufficient. It feels like there needs to be another adjective that truly describes the unemployment situation, especially youth unemployment in this country that sits at well over 77%. So how critical a moment is Budget 2022, and how important is it that that moment shouldn't be missed by government in terms of pulling the levers that needs to be pulled to make things happen?
I think it's quite critical, and even to add on that, quite significantly critical, because as you're putting it, unemployment is what we can call a crisis at times, because an emergency would last for a few days or possibly years and finish. But we've been having this program for quite a number of years, and to know for a fact that according to the research that we've discovered at Youth Capital, that 9.4 million people are not in employment, education, or training. So in addition to the statistics that you just pronounced now about youth unemployment, it puts a great deal of stress to say that this is a good opportunity that shouldn't be missed. So for young people, I think it will be important for the budget speech to reflect how the commitments that were made by the president during the SONA will actually materialize, because he did mention quite a few number of initiatives that are going to be initiated. So the budget speech will then give us an opportunity to see how is that going to be put in place. And in addition to that, to see whether the government recognizes that the unemployment issue is not an issue that we can solve by looking at one perspective. We need a holistic view to see that unemployment doesn't begin only when you are looking for a job, but there's also some other systematic things that affect young people when they look for jobs, especially your education and the conditions in the labor market, where, for example, like when you are looking for a job. So we need to ensure that the budget speech, we also see that what is the commitment on education, ensuring that the young people there are prepared enough so that they are ready for the labor market, and also how the government is going to support the young people to ensure that when they look for jobs, they are in an environment that enables them to do that, and also how the part that the employers and the social institutions are going to play on that.
I want to bring you in here, Dimpho. And there's a graphic on our screen at the moment, and this is an interesting one because it spoke exactly to what Bonginkosi is speaking about, the actual preparation for of a young person entering the world of work. And if you look at that screen, the youth unemployment in this country, around about 10 million people or youth between the ages of 15 and 24 are out of work. But when you narrow that down, and this is a fascinating stat, in that bracket, 3.5 million people are not in work, not in education, not in training. Right? That's 33.5% of that bracket, 3.5 million youngsters. And you mentioned something about budget priority and where the money goes. How can Wednesday's budget remedy that problem of taking people and putting them into a work, educational training? So in other words, improving that stat that we're talking about here. Dimpho.
Yeah, I think the ironic thing, right, is that we talk about education and training, but education and training is one of the departments that get the biggest budget cuts each and every year. So the problem is not that education isn't being financed. I think the real work starts after the Minister of Finance then says, this amount of money is going to go towards education. The real work begins after that, during those consultative processes, right? To say, okay, if we've allocated $1 million towards NSFAS, for example, how much of that is going towards historical debts? How much of that is going towards funding students within this current academic year? How much of that money is going towards infrastructural programs within education, right? And how long are we giving ourselves, how much time are we giving ourselves to see those initiatives and programs through? Programs and initiatives and policies are there. It's always a matter of execution. There are programs to eliminate things like pit latrines, for example, to improve sanitation in schools. There have been initiatives to improve infrastructure, but we still find ourselves with young people who are 40, 50 in a class, particularly in public schools. So I think it's not necessarily a matter of what the minister is going to say on Wednesday, but how we as young people can then organize and use platforms such as those created by Youth Lab and Youth Capital to continue holding the necessary departments and the necessary leadership, even at community level, accountable for actually doing the work, and I think spending the budget in the ways in which the minister has promised or will promise come Wednesday.
I've got a question for the both of you. So let me start with you, Bonginkosi. I'm pretty sure you've been watching this whole debate about what President Cyril Ramaphosa said in his State of the Nation address about the role of the private sector versus government in creation of jobs. The words we all know that government doesn't create jobs. It is the private sector that creates jobs. Of course, it has triggered a whole conversation, Devon, with the president moving to clarify what exactly he meant and qualifying what he was saying. Just from watching Bonginkosi, this particular debate, there's the example of the teachers' assistance programs that we referred to, that Dimpho referred to at the start of this conversation. When you weigh up the balance, is this conversation helpful, and should it be happening right now? And as far as you can see, how should the balance be struck between the responsibilities of government and the private sector?
Yeah, I think what I can say that the government should recognize that they are mostly responsible for is creating an environment and ensuring that the labor market is good for businesses to thrive, and also good for young people to thrive in it as well. So that is the main biggest role in it. And with regards to the conversation around this, yeah, it was quite a big conversation, and I've been looking at it as well since the day that the president mentioned this. But the issue of unemployment is obviously quite large, and I would agree that it needs involvement from multiple stakeholders. So obviously a private sector has a significant role to play in it, and not that they are ones who have to be blamed for any problems that go there within, but they have quite a significant stake to hold when it comes to youth unemployment. But I think what is important is ensuring that from the government perspective, any systematic roadblocks that might be there with regards to the business environment are removed, and that the government collaborates with the private sector when it comes to creating jobs, and not only the government. So if we also noticed a very important thing, that while we are preparing young people for employment on education, we need to ensure that the skills that they are getting and the education that they are receiving at higher education institutions and other training institutions is relevant to what the private sector is looking for. So the skills that are applicable to the job market.
Dimpho, as you also answer the question that Thulas put forward, let me just sort of angle it a little bit more. Remember, 3 years ago, or even 5 years ago, we had this insistence for the private sector to provide enough internships for individuals coming out. Now, just considering Thulas's previous question, have we seen enough internships by the private sector to gear up our young people in this country for work?
So I think to answer that question, I'll make reference to the President's Youth Employment Service, right, which I think was launched in 2018, 2019. And at the beginning of the initiative, it was meant to create, I think, up to 1 million entry-level work opportunities for young people, because they had realized that the biggest stumbling block to young people being able to access employment is that they don't have experience. So you're kind of just stuck in that situation where you can't get work because you don't have experience, but you can't get experience because you can't find work. So they team up with, I think, medium to small and medium businesses, but also bigger corporations, to allow young people to have these entry-level opportunities. So I don't think the issue is necessarily creating them, but like you're saying, numbers are important. They had promised 1 million of these, and I don't even think that the program has reached 100,000, and that was about 2 years ago. And also, I think we also need to interrogate, like, beyond the employment opportunity, what are young people actually gaining from these internships, right? Are they positioning young people to be more employable beyond the 3-month or the 6-month contracts? Because that's what they're actually supposed to do. And also, how much are young people getting paid? Are young people getting paid enough to upskill themselves, for example, during the 6 months that they spend at company A or company B? And does that then position them to be able to find employment beyond that internship? So I think, parallel to the conversation about creating internships, we also really need to ask ourselves about the quality of these work opportunities, or else we're just going to find ourselves in a cycle where young people go from one opportunity to another, but where there's no actual career growth, and that doesn't address the employment issue, I think, at a structural level.
All right, we've got to thank you for your time and your insights here on All Angles, Dimpho Lekgeu and Bonginkosi Mchunu. It's always important to hear from the people at the coalface of some of these conversations, especially in the build-up, Devon, to Budget 2022. So let me wrap it up with you then, given what we've heard from the guests that we've heard who were sharing from their expertise and experience at the coalface. How do you then, in framing the budget, strike the balance at this very moment between the imperatives of creating pathways to economic activities to respond to the figures that you were showing us a bit earlier on, and the conversation that says strengthen the social wage at the moment, because there's also that conversation that we didn't even get to touch on with our guests?
I think they're so intricately related. I mean, we were just getting feedback on the 350 Rand social grant, and many young people said that money allowed them to equip themselves with transport to actually go and look for a job.
Sure.
The same situation lies with PRASA. You know, the finance minister's actually been told, well, give us some sort of a plan. What happens here? Again, it's transport to and from economic activity for young people. All of these things are intricately related. When we are talking about employment, you've got to have a fixable working economy. So we'll see how this unfolds on Wednesday, too.